thank you for registering to our brand new series, Beyond Brave New World, Responding to Visions of the Future. Most of you will already know, but I'm Sarah. I'm the Program Director for ISCAST. And I hope you all survived the winter break and can join us each Thursday evening for the next 9 or so weeks to grapple with some very cutting edge themes. But first, let me say this. As we gather in the presence of God, we acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands upon which we meet. In his wisdom and love, our Heavenly Father entrusted this estate, from where I'm speaking from tonight, to the stewardship of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. As we continue to learn to live on these ancestral lands, we acknowledge all the traditional custodians from each of the geographic areas we meet from tonight, and we pay respect to their elders past, present, and in the future. And we pray that God will unite us all in the knowledge of his Son, in whom all things were created, in heaven and on earth, whether visible or invisible. For all things have been created through him and for him. So I'll just pray now, and then I'll hand over to Nicola to introduce our speaker. Lord, our Father, we give thanks and praise for the technology that enables us to be together to learn and share tonight. Science is a wonderful blessing that has done so much good. But over the next number of weeks, we will be exploring emerging technologies, once fantasies that we could almost grasp, but with the potential to alter our humanness. Are these good things? Should we move from therapeutic uses of technology to human enhancement? Is there a social justice cost? And how does this change how we commune with one another? And above all, our Saviour, Jesus Christ. Please help us, God, to tease out these issues with respect and with the full knowledge that our brokenness can only be restored through the cross of our Lord Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen. Thank you. And tēnā koutou katoa. Good evening to everyone and welcome back from New Zealand Christians in Science. Thank you for supporting us in this series, and welcome also to those who are watching online, because I know many of you actually listen in later. We're very grateful tonight to have Pete Armstrong speak to us. His vision of the future is rapidly changing transport and food technology. Pete is a fellow trustee on the board of Arosha. He's a power systems engineer and senior manager, qualified with a Bachelor of Electrical Engineering from the University of Canterbury and a Master of Business Administration from the University of Waikato. He has 29 years of electricity industry experience, working in generation, transmission, distribution in New Zealand, and consulting both in New Zealand and internationally. He is currently General Manager, the network for EA Networks, the distribution network in the Ashburton district in New Zealand. He has a strong interest in power sector economics and disruptive new technologies and advancing decarbonisation using renewable electricity. Some of our conversations will be more philosophical or theological, and some will be more technical. This one will be a more technical presentation of the future, and this invites us all to think about and contemplate the theological repercussions and the ethical reaction to disruptive new technologies. So thank you, Pete.
Tēnā koutou katoa. Thank you, Nicola. That's an awesome introduction. So yeah, the times they are changing, as Bob Dylan said, but these days at an exponential rate. And as Nicola was saying, I guess the interest that I have in this, the growth of exponential technologies, is because they are impacting the industry in which I work. So the electricity industry worldwide is grappling with the decarbonisation agenda. And rapidly changing economics of renewable energy from wind and solar PV and battery storage, as well as the impacts that AI will have on our society as well as our industry. So as far as talking about the topics that I will touch on, I feel a little bit like I'm going to skate over a very wide area quite shallowly, and you'd be well advised, I think, to tune into the other talks in the series where people will go into greater depth and things like AI and stuff like that. So yeah, that would be my recommendation. But we're going to start by talking about exponential change and breakthrough technologies and what that means. Talk a little bit about AI and its impact on the future of work. Talk about what transport as a service will look like. in not too distant future, and then think about what food or software might hold for the way we eat. Now, we have an unchanging God, but a changing world. So in Hebrews 6, verses 17 to 19a, it says, because God wanted to make the unchanging nature of his purpose very clear to the heirs of what was promised, he confirmed it with an oath. God did this so that by two unchangeable things, in which it is impossible for God to lie, we who have fled to take hold of the hope before us may be greatly encouraged. We have this hope as an anchor for the soul, firm and secure. However, in our world, things are changing rapidly, and Randall Schweller puts it like this: the world is undergoing transformation, a chaotic period here. Almost anything can happen and little can be predicted, where yesterday's rule takers can become tomorrow's rule makers. But no one follows the rules anymore, where competing global visions collide with each other, where remnants of the past, present, and future coexist simultaneously. So I guess that keys into the example of a disruptor like Uber, who entered markets with a radical business model founded on the mobile phone platform, enabled by AI software, ignored all regulatory restraints, and exploited gig economy workers. So let's have a look at what exponential change means. The pace of change in our society and technology is rapid, and in some transformational cases will be exponential. Exponential change is fueled by breakthrough technologies and economic advantage, which accelerates the rate of uptake and transforms aspects of our society and how we use technology. So I'm drawing on some research done by a think tank called RethinkX, based in America. They say that mainstream analysis produces linear, mechanistic, and siloed forecasts that ignore systems complexity and thus consistently underplay the speed and extent of technology disruptions. For example, solar PV, electric vehicles, and mobile phone adoption. So those are some examples of where we see this type of S-curve for adoption, as you can see on the screen there. So way down at the early stage of that technology, it looks sort of low and linear. There's nothing to see here. It's just another fad. And then it reaches this tipping point where the economics and the compelling offering of the technology breaks through, and it hits this exponential growth curve, and it just surges to the top of the curve. And then you get the last adopters sort of filling at the end. So if you think about it for mobile phones, there's still people that don't have a mobile phone, and there's a few people still with the old bricks, but most of us have got smartphones. And that's been quite a quick transition. So here's an illustration of what exponential change looks like. So in the Fifth Ave of New York City in 1900, where is the car? Well, there's one single car surrounded by the rest of horse-drawn carriages. Then the same scene in 1913, where is the horse? There's just a single horse left, and the rest have been turned into motor cars. So the uptake of personal motor cars is an example of exponential technology, where the advantages of convenience, the energy density of petroleum fuel, and over time, the performance and economy superseded the horse and cart as a means of transportation. And I might actually add probably the ease of not having to deal with a whole lot of horse dung. So many products follow exponential S-curve adoptions, and this graphic is one that I pulled from the internet. And you can look down the list of the different technologies that have followed these curves, but I guess one is you can see some of them look pretty steep, and the ones that are happening in the last 20 years, they look almost vertical. And I guess this is the nothing succeeds like success. When you start to bring technology to the table, you can rapidly develop new technologies based on those old technologies. And I guess that's where we might be heading with artificial intelligence, as the machines learn so fast, and that you can create new machines or new software from machines. So that brings us on to AI and the future of work. So the economic motivation for automation is via artificial intelligence is strong and is rapidly being adopted in our society, but longer term has significant implications for the future of work, people maintaining their livelihoods, and the viability of the economy, when you think of the fact that everyone needs an income in order to pay for the services they will consume, which keeps the whole economic machine running. The trend in artificial intelligence or AI expert systems and integrated information systems is likely to make administration activities obsolete, replaced by automated systems with minimal human intervention and a lower cost base. So I drew on, I think it's the Oxford study around this when I did one of my MBA assignments around summary of future trends in workplace automation. And also looked at some work that McKinsey had published in the same area. In a summary statement, the current automation trend is for labour market polarisation, with growth in high-income cognitive jobs and low-income manual occupations, with a hollowing out of the middle-income routine jobs. The potential for the discovery of methods to economise the use of labour to outpace the ability to find new uses for labour is concerning. So in other words, we used to be able to educate human labour to be able to move ahead of the automation. In the past, human labour has prevailed because of the ability to adopt and acquire new skills by education and training. The entry of computerization into more cognitive domains makes this increasingly challenging, raising questions about the ability of human labour to win the race against technology by means of education. The potential benefits of automation appear attractive, stemming from increased output, higher quality, improved reliability, and in cases, the potential to perform tasks at superhuman levels. These machines don't need to sleep, they can work all night, and you don't even have to have the lights turned on in the factory. The benefits have been assessed at 3 to 10 times the cost. Given the magnitude of these benefits, significant competitive advantage may be available to those organisations that can successfully staff, manage and lead increasingly automated organisations. So from the Oxford study, they looked at certain occupations being easier to automate, and those that are rules driven and have processing activities that can be replicated in algorithms like accounting and law, for example, and even doctors doing diagnosing can be done in a rules-based manner. Those are the easier to automate professions. And the harder to automate bucket are managing and developing people, which is a 9% automation potential, and applying expertise to decision-making, planning or creative work, 18% automation potential. So at the moment, I'm sort of sitting back in my chair a little bit smug because I'm an engineer and I'm a manager, so I sort of sit on the right-hand side of the equation. But certainly in my industry, I think we're going to need the help of machines because we're so short of labour at the moment that everything we can automate, we probably should get on and do. Now, I've mentioned Rethink X as the think tank previously. Now, Tony Seba is a co-founder of Rethink X. He's an author and educator. And in July 2020, he said, the 2020s will be the deepest, fastest, deepest, most disruptive decade in the history for energy, transportation, food and agriculture, information and materials, with cascading effects across all sectors of the economy, cities, geopolitics and the environment, and dramatic implications for humanity. And based on the reports that Rethink X have modelled and produced, I would have to agree with that. So we'll talk about transport as a service. So transport as a service basically is automated self-driving vehicles, electric vehicles, circulating around cities and transporting people as a taxi would now, but you don't need a human to drive them. And they only have to recharge occasionally. And it means that essentially there's a strong economic incentive for people not to own cars. So I'm going to illustrate some things around transport as a service through scenario planning, informed by Rethink X technology and economic modelling. So this was another one of my MBA assignments which looked at electricity and transportation in New Zealand in 2050. So in scenario planning, you've got two focus axes. So what you're trying to do is thinking about what are the two significant drivers in the future that will shape change, and then you look at extremes at each end of those axes to give you different quadrants to plan with. So Two significant drivers in the next 30 years are technology development and climate change. So the two are closely related, as it seems only significant technological development and significant societal change will prevent climatic disaster. Let's look at those axes then. So we looked at three scenarios where you either had minor climate change to major climate change, and you had low tech to high tech. So just to briefly illustrate those, in the major climate change low tech corner, you've got the Flintstones. In other words, technology development just stops. And we've got all the downsides of major climatic change, and things look pretty grim. In the quadrant to the top right, we've got cloudy with a chance of meatballs, which I'll go into in a minute. And in the bottom, you've got the high-tech minor climate change corner. We've got all this amazing technology, but without the climate change downsides, and it's like the future according to the Jetsons. So I'll just play a quick movie trailer. All right, so this is scenario 2, which is in that major climate change high technology quadrant. And we called it cloudy with a chance of meatballs to give that idea that high technology change was going to overcome the extreme effects of climate change. So the characteristics we sort of envisaged for that future was there was almost free household electricity. We had 99% electric vehicle use, supersonic air travel for the very rich, aero farming, so new techniques to produce food without a lot of water, and cheap, quick housing to look after the climate change refugees coming out of the Pacific. So we used the STEEP framework to look at this scenario, and that stands for social, technological, economic, environmental, and political. And they're all being different lenses that we can use to understand the scenario's impact. So I'll just read through those impacts now. So for social, virtually there. So with air travel being made very high priced with oil shortages and carbon taxes, people either travel domestically by train or EV. International travel is only for the privileged few. So most people do tourism using virtual reality experiences, which is like a Google version of Lonely Planet. And they communicate with loved ones by sophisticated holographic projections. Transport as a service. An autonomous EV hail a lift is so much cheaper per kilometre travelled than private transport due to the high utilisation of the vehicles and lower priced electricity as fuel. Almost no one owns their own vehicle except in remote rural areas. Ride together for free. So outfits like Uber, Lyft and others offer free shared transport using autonomous EV by exploiting revenue streams from data, advertising to passengers, or packaging with other products. For example, a mobile Starbucks outlet that drives you to and others to work. Technological. Solar, free power and daylight. Very high adoption of solar PV as panels or as entire roof cladding leads to almost free electricity during the daytime, and batteries are cheap enough for households to use stored PV overnight. More trusted than a human driver, autonomous EV vehicles are 99% of the vehicle fleet. Road deaths are down to 5% of 2020 levels. Rural people may own or rent their own vehicles if there are no transport as a service providers nearby. Under economic, transport has never been more affordable. Transport as a service is 4 to 10 times cheaper than owning a new car and 2 to 5 times cheaper than owning a used car. This releases about $10,000 per annum into each household by avoiding car ownership, equivalent to a 10% rise in wages. This fuels the economy through consumer spending. The end of the good oil. So the economic price is paid in the automotive industry as the number of vehicles manufactured falls by 70%. The oil industry faces a sharp contraction with demand falling to 50% of current levels, and the price falling to around US $25 per barrel. Many oil resources are no longer economically recoverable. Carbon taxes marginalise oil use into specialised niches like petrochemicals, and the established electrical industry barely subsists. Because of the abundance of PV electricity priced at almost zero, and households and small commercials self-sufficient with PV and batteries, the remaining value of the transmission and distribution system is just sharing the excess PV around to higher demand users. In this way, the industry maintains a transmission link between the larger industrial users, largely dairy processors, and the remote hydro, geothermal and wind generation. Rates of return in generation, transmission and distribution fall, and rationalisation of distribution networks into remote and uneconomic areas occur as self-sufficient consumers disconnect. Next, in environmental, we have some pretty extreme features of climate change, which no doubt we're all aware of. Seeing weather extremes in the extreme, heat waves, widespread flooding, and failure of existing land uses. But the vulnerability of transportation is buffered by the influx of cheap EVs, and the impact on electricity is mitigated by cheap solar PV and batteries. To briefly recap on environmental effects, water is now for food, not watts. So hydroelectric dams are repurposed as irrigation reservoirs to bolster food production in the hotter, dry eastern regions of New Zealand. River flows are pushed to minimum levels due to the demand for irrigation. Cheap electricity buffers climate change. Because electricity has remained cheap, pumping for irrigation to ensure food production is possible and people can maintain a quality of life with air conditioning. Aotearoa can maintain some exported food to a hungry world because there's electricity for dairy processing, etc. And finally, political, the swing to central planning and social welfare. Due to population pressure from Pacific Islands climate refugees, the government is forced to respond with more regimented central planning approach to build the regional high-density housing and infrastructure required. Social welfare is provided at a subsistence level, as this is all the nation can afford. From greed is good to the common good, wealth becomes less socially acceptable and left-leaning, and green governments dominate. So just to recap on transport as a service, because that was just one of the threads that was coming through in that particular scenario. By 2030, New Zealand households save $10,000 per annum through transport as a service, the autonomous EV hailer lift, and ride together for free if bundled with your coffee, Subway, or in exchange for your data. And I've got to say the technology exists right now, and we were criticised in our assignment for not probably pushing the boat out far enough. If we've got 30 years to 2050, probably some more amazing things have happened rather than this. RethinkX was saying, you know, this should happen in the next 10 years. So looking at the graphic on the right, the economics is related to the expected decline in battery costs. It's RethinkX view that the social factors of individual ownership, personalisation of your vehicle, social status, love of driving and fear of automated vehicles will be outweighed by chiefly lower costs, aided by speed of travel, convenience, free time and safety. Now we'll move on and talk about food as software, and so that movie clip about Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs is perhaps not too far-fetched according to RethinkX's modelling. So this is protein disruption by economics. So if you can see in the graphic there, microbrewing takes on a new meaning. So anywhere beer is made today, it will soon be possible to make protein. So the cost of proteins will be 5 times cheaper by 2030 and 10 times cheaper by 2035 than existing animal proteins, before ultimately approaching the cost of sugar. They will also be superior in every key attribute, more nutritious, healthier, better tasting, and more convenient, with almost unimaginable variety. This means that by 2030, modern food products will be higher quality and cost less than half as much to produce as the animal-derived products they replace. This is the result of rapid advance in precision biology that have allowed us to make huge strides in precision fermentation, a process that allows us to program microorganisms to produce almost any complex organic molecule. These advances are now being combined with an entirely new model of production we call food as software, in which individual molecules engineered by scientists are uploaded to databases, molecular cookbooks that food engineers anywhere in the world can use to design products in the same way that software engineers design apps. This model ensures a constant iteration so that products improve rapidly, with each version superior and cheaper than the last. It also ensures that a production system that is completely decentralized and much more stable and resilient than industrial animal agriculture, with fermentation farms located on or in or close to towns and cities. Modern alternatives will be up to 100 times more land efficient, 10 to 20 times more feedstock efficient, 20 times more time efficient, and 10 times more water efficient. They also will produce an order of magnitude less waste. And we're just seeing the beginning of this, I guess, with the Impossible Burger that you may have heard of, and some of the suggestions that are coming out in this area in terms of using effectively reactor vessels to produce food. So food as software will have dramatic effects economically and on the environment, here expressed in relation to the United States of America. In economic terms, the cost of modern foods and other precision fermentation products will be at least 50% as much as 80% lower than the animal products they will replace, which will translate into substantially lower prices and increased disposable incomes. At current prices, revenues of the US beef and dairy industries and their suppliers, which together exceed $400 billion today, will decline by at least 50% by 2030 and by nearly 90% by 2035, which is a catastrophic decline. And all other livestock and commercial fisheries will follow a similar trajectory. The average US family will save more than $1,200 a year in food costs. This will keep an additional $100 billion a year in Americans' pockets by 2030. Looking at the environmental impacts, by 2035, 60% of the land currently used for livestock and feed production will be freed for other uses. This 485 million acres equates to 11 times the size of the state of Iowa. If all this freed land were dedicated to reforestation intended to maximize carbon sequestration, all current sources of US greenhouse gas emissions could be fully offset by 2035. Net water consumption in the food sector will decline by 35% by 2030 and 60% by 2035. So now to sort of draw it to a close, Leonard Sweet has this quote: "A sea change of transition and transformation is birthing a whole new world and a whole new set of ways of making our way in the world. We've moved out of the solid ground of terra firma into the tossing seas of terra aqua." So in summary, pace of change in our society and technology is rapid, and in some transformational cases will be exponential. Exponential change is fueled by breakthrough technologies and economic advantage, which accelerates the rate of uptake and transforms aspects of a society and how we use technology. Like an exponential curve, the rate of uptake is initially low and linear until reaching a breakthrough point where the uptake rapidly and exponentially rises. We are seeing examples of exponential technology change in AI and autonomous vehicles, with manufactured food being a likely further change in the longer term. The economic motivation for automation by AI is strong, has rapidly been adopted in our society, but longer term has significant implications for the future of work and people maintaining livelihoods and viability of the economy. Autonomous vehicles and transport as a service involves fleets of EVs providing point-to-point personal transport that in metropolitan areas would offer a significant economic advantage of not needing to own a car. The technology to implement transport as a service is essentially developed now. Manufactured food technologies, food as software, allows food to be generated from constituent ingredients and reactor vessels. This is a coming technology that could revolutionalise the economics and drastically reduce the economic impact of food production. The potential downside to farming-specific economies could be significant, but potentially compensated for by higher disposable income from lower food costs and the environmental upside. So I need to give credit where credit's due. So here's some of the references that I used in pulling together this material. So I mentioned a couple of references from McKinsey's to do with the AI and the fundamentals of workplace economics, and the Oxford study in terms of the future of employment, how susceptible jobs are to computerization. And then a couple of reports from Rethink X. So that is rethinking transportation and rethinking food and agriculture. That's all I've got as far as the presentation. So happy to have some questions.
You've given us a lot to think about there. Elisa White, do you have a question?
Your presentation is fascinating. Thank you very much. What I am concerned about is two things. One of them is geography, that is to say, concerned with what can happen where, according to the nature of the things that you've talked about. But secondly, it's very primarily based upon very low price electricity. And I wonder how feasible that is, especially from the point of view of local generation or indeed transmission.
Yeah, that's a good question. So different areas in the world have got different fuel types for electricity, and so some are better endowed than others. I have to say New Zealand is fairly well endowed with renewable hydro. So, and we've always have been, so we've always had a fairly high proportion of renewable electricity. But one of the problems that you face with hydro, unless you're like Norway and they've got sort of 5 years worth of storage in their hydro resource, in New Zealand we've got about 3 months. So we're going to run short of electricity in the middle of winter if it's a dry winter, or we're going to run short of electricity if we have a series of cold, still days with no wind. At the moment, we're kind of stuck. We'll be short of capacity unless we maintain some form of thermal generation. So returning to your question, the modelling seems based mainly around saying solar power is going to be really cheap. So the cost curve for solar power has been dropping on an exponential basis, and they're expecting that to continue as it develops. And it's easily grid competitive now in terms of price. So that means at least during the day, you get this very cheap electricity because everyone's got a solar panel on their roof, or everyone who can afford it. So you do raise a useful point. There's some people that will have this access to this and some won't, and there'll be some inequality in societies because of that. And you might also say some of the technologies we've been talking about, it's been modeled from a very American-centric sort of view. And so you would say developed countries are going to have an easier access to this potentially than less developed countries. But I think the economics will probably drive it to be available to more and more places in the world. For example, the food as software idea, if you can, all you need to make food is the constituent ingredients, and you grow these microorganisms in a bioreactor, you don't need a water supply to the same extent as you used to. You don't need the sun to shine. You do need, you're going to need some electricity or something to run the systems on. But it's not like you could produce this food almost in a desert sort of situation, as opposed to, it doesn't have to be a lush New Zealand pasture or a fantastic grassland sort of thing to produce beef.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bronwyn, could you unmute and ask your question, please?
Hi, thanks very much for a fascinating presentation. I was quite blown away by the I'll call it synthetic food brewing, whatever you want to call it. Could you say could you give us a bit more information as to how far advanced this technology is, and how realistic are these timelines to say 2030, 2035? Because we're 2022 now, and that's really not far away. So I'd love to hear more.
Yeah, well, I was also fairly surprised about that. But if we think about it, though, people have it's been, you know, maybe 3 or 4 years ago, the Impossible Burger came out, and people were saying, "Oh gosh, I can taste this burger patty, and it tastes like meat. It's got the texture like meat." When we did this particular topic in my MBA class in 2017, 2018, somebody brought some vegetable protein chicken to class, and everyone had a taste of it. So the products have actually been around for a little while. I think what we're seeing is the increased sophistication and the improved taste and the better characteristics. They're still getting there right now, I think. I had a Rebel Whopper the other day. So that's the plant-based burger from Burger King in New Zealand, which I think is Hungry Jack's in Australia. And it didn't taste so good. It was all right, but it's oat-based or something. It doesn't taste as good as juicy frame grilled beef. But point is, the technology is going to rapidly evolve, and so that's what drives the uptake, is both the combination of favourable economics and the fact that it's as good as, if not better than normal stuff, I think.
Thank you. Daniel, do you want to unmute and give your question? Yeah.
Thanks, Nicola. Hi, Pete. So my question was in regards to the autonomous vehicles. When it comes to programming them, like putting the programming script for them, what do you think will be the way it will be programmed to make ethical decisions?
Yeah, no, I'm going to take some wild punts here. I don't know, actually. I mean, Google's been doing it for ages, so they've had the autonomous car program. You know, aware that Tesla's been doing it for a long time as well, and they've been putting. I think what's driven that has been, or part of what's driven that is that the technologies have got amazingly cheap. So the LiDAR system. So LiDAR stands for light emitting data and ranging. So it's like it's a light emitted version of a radar system. And you've got surrounding your car, and it can, if you've seen a Tesla driving, it can see the center line, it can see the edge of the road, it can see the trees you're driving past, it can see the vehicles coming in the opposite direction through this LiDAR technology. And there's one graphic in the transportation report from RethinkX that said, you know, the unit's got amazingly small and amazingly cheap. So from $70,000 for a LiDAR unit, which is more than the whole car kind of costs, now down to something that's very small and cheap to $1,000 sort of price. So I think the ethical decisions, well, I'd be interested, what do you think? What do you think the ethical decisions that these cars would need to make?
Well, I mean, it's like the classic trolley problem, say, for example, there's a crossing and the car has to decide, you know, it's going to crash and there's people crossing the road. Does it aim for the rich businessman or take out sort of like the for people that, you know, might be beggars or something like that? It's kind of, I'm just trying to think of something in relation to that trolley, making those kind of ethical decisions and how the AI system would be programmed, or whoever's creating it, to make those decisions. And that's just a real simple scenario, but there's going to probably be a whole heap of others that the car has to make autonomously, independent of a human, and who kind of has the overall deciding factor as to what the ethics are, and who, you know, who makes the decision as to what are the right ethics to apply in a variety of scenarios. So I guess I'm just curious to find out where you see that might be heading, or
well, yeah. No, it's a great point, and I never really thought of that. I imagine that the system they're programming it to, they're trying to make it safer than a human, so it'll be able to make decisions faster than a human will. They'll be trying to expose it to as much of the real world as it can once it leaves the laboratory, and you train it using training videos maybe, but you put then they've been driving these things around and training them in the real world to try and expose them to all these different situations. I don't think a human will be able to tell. I don't know that much about how to program AI, but I doubt a human will be able to tell it, this particular person or class of person is more or less important than any others. I think it'll be just trying to avoid loss of human life generally, according to the rules of the road. And then if it's put in an impossible situation, someone's going to get injured, sure, or worse. But yeah, I think it's been interesting to note that while there have been some accidents involving autonomous vehicles, they are already safer than humans. So we're getting a little hung up on an ethical question about something that performs better than ourselves when we climb behind the wheel. That's another way of thinking about it.
Yeah, I think there's a lot to be said about that one, but we can't solve that tonight. But thank you. Ian Parker, you're next.
Well, it is discussion of artificial intelligence. I think back to what we were doing in the 1970s on paper machines when we were writing programs for P2P11 computers, and we had instrumentation on the paper machine that we could use to measure what was happening. When we're talking about artificial intelligence now, we're talking about something more significant than that and applied to other industries and services.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, no, I think we are. To give you an idea from a concrete example from one of the company directors of a company I used to work for, he had a security firm. And so they had trained drones to be a security patrol around their factory. So by exposing them to images and helping them to recognize things, that when the security fence triggered that someone had penetrated the factory, the drone would take off and go fly around and recognize an intruder and follow it and call the cops. And the drone could recognize that the door was unlocked or had been broken into and call the cops. So that sort of self-learning where all you have to do is plug your algorithm into a series of images and direct it and reward it when it gets things right. That's what I was talking about when I talked about performing at superhuman levels. These machines can learn this stuff really fast.
Yes, I have a nephew who's involved in using drones to analyze crops.
And I think that's one of the amazing things is that AI can be directed at all sorts of problems in different industries. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Charlie.
Yeah, my question is sort of about this assumption of post-scarcity, which it seems to me that a lot of this is based on. Everybody will have all these batteries. Everybody will have all these solar panels. The current technology required for the current generation of those things depends on very scarce resource. And there's political constraints on getting it, and there are human constraints on getting it, and there are environmental constraints on getting it. I wonder about the extreme optimism of these post-scarcity suggestions. And just as another point of that, the autonomous cars, yeah, they have to keep circling around all the time or lying around all the time waiting because, gosh, if they don't come as quickly as your car, then which is why people don't take public transport. Oh my goodness, it might take 20 minutes instead of 10. No, we can't have that. Even though you can sit on the bus and read or whatever, no, that's not good enough. It must be there instantly. It's waste of human productivity time, as our friends in the conservative political parties are bold to say all the time. So do the people who make these fantastic post-scarcity predictions about all this how do they take all of these issues into account?
No, I don't know. I'm not at that level of detail within their modeling, but they would have looked at, I guess, the feasibility of their models and constrained them by what they believe could happen. But I think you're right to be a bit skeptical about, can we get enough of lithium, for example, to make enough batteries? But I'm kind of encouraged by the myriad of different battery technologies that seem to come out of the woodwork every several months by, in some of the technological news feeds that I get, where people are finding batteries that can be made from very plentiful materials to try and get around these problems. So I suspect when we encounter difficulties, one of the things that makes me optimistic in the face of the difficulties that I do see in terms of climate change and there's always a cost for everything, there's always scarcity, is that when scarcity occurs, we tend to find another solution. So I hope so, but I agree with you. There's grounds for skepticism.
Yeah. And of course, energy density is the other thing about the batteries. And way back in the 50s, Robert Heinlein, the great science fiction author, premised his future universe on two radical breakthroughs. One was the solar power screens that were good enough, and the other was the Shipstone battery power storage thingy that was good enough. We have probably the good enough solar power screens now. We don't have anything like the good enough batteries to bring the power or transmission to bring the power from where it's plentiful to the places where it's currently used. So we either all have to move to the Sahara or the South Island, or we need better transmission and batteries than we've got. And so, but this is once more the great optimism of the futurists. They're sure it's going to happen, but where it requires a breakthrough.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so perhaps coming back quickly to your point about autonomous vehicles circling around, I think they're talking about us needing about 10% of the number of cars we need right now. So that makes the amount of materials you need less. It will work in a metropolitan city, not so much in the smaller centres and out in the countryside. So I think it is a bit of horses for courses. With work from home and flexible hours and all that sort of thing, I think we can take the peak off our transport needs as well, so that you can get these vehicles to make ends meet, if you like. And the other thing is that the shared ride type idea is you can put, in actual fact, you can put 4 people in each of these cars. You don't have to have one of them being the driver.
Yeah, I agree. You could. They all have to want to be together.
True.
Anyway, good enough, but thank you very much.
Okay, now that's great. Now we're beginning to get to the other kind of yes, but those who want some farms. Megan, do you want to?
Sure. Sorry, my voice sounds really awful. I'm not that sick, but yeah, I'm getting over a virus. Yeah, I guess I'm just wondering, I've worked in a research lab and now I'm heading more into the education side of science. Right now, the science curriculums that I'm looking at, they're pretty void of any input from past history, which I think is somewhat dangerous because we're not helping students see mistakes that have been made in the past, or good things that have happened in the past as well with sciences. And so I'm just wondering where the need for wisdom fits into all of this, and how people in these industries are looking for wisdom, I guess, because we know that as science being a tool, it can be used for good things and bad things, sadly. And just how do we know that we're making the best decisions for the future? And I guess I'm thinking of that mainly due to students that I'm going to be teaching and helping them, decide how to be wise with all of these future possibilities.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. I think the types of visions I've been presenting are very economically based, and so it says that the rules of the market will rule, and so there's a strong incentive for people to do this stuff. They will develop it, they'll make money. They want to get that exponential curve so they get a return on their investment. But it doesn't make it the wise or best thing to do. And if we think about the weaponization of AI for military use, it's frightening, and Elon Musk came out and has tried to warn against the use of some of this technology. And so I agree with you. I think it's really important that bounds are put around the use of some of the stuff, or all of the stuff. So that's I know it's not particularly popular with people who are strongly economically driven, but I'm strongly economically rational myself. I try to be, but I also think there's a significant role for regulation to stop the downsides from occurring, because you can't translate every downside into an economic signal.
Thank you. Well, Chris, quickly, Jackie, and then John, and then I think that might be the end of questions.
Can you hear me?
Yes, now.
I live in New Zealand. We are food producer. Our economy rely on our meat export. So if you change our lifestyle, change our diet, it affects the way we run the country. Where would the revenue come from?
That's a really good point. I think it is quite concerning for countries like New Zealand, where we export so much of our food, that we could end up, if the numbers, the modelling for the US could be translated to New Zealand, you're talking about halving the size of the dairy industry, and then down to 10% after that, 2035. It's dramatic. It does indicate that you may need to find alternative uses for that land to make other things, perhaps other things that are not easy to replicate with these products.
Well, George Monbiot would say it should all go back to the wild.
Well, that's another perspective, and I think that was the point in the study made about reforestation. If you want to try and create huge carbon sinks, that's another way of doing it. And you know, humans in New Zealand have drastically changed the landscape. It's just unrecognisable to what it was, and it would be pretty amazing to see a good chunk of it return to native forest, which actually is a far better carbon sink than a commercial forest.
Thank you. John.
Thank you, Pete, for your presentation. I'm following on, if you like, from Megan's question about the science needs wisdom to be applied. I mean, my rule of thumb is that technological innovation has the potential of both good and evil. The computer, for example, has, you know, revolutionized the way we operate, but it's also got a very dark side. Not just the dark undergrowth, but the hacking of institutions and the unregulated exposition of hate speech and so on and so on. So my sort of take is that when you're talking about technology and the possible promise of technological innovations, technology is not neutral, and it's not always picked up by everybody. So some people pick up a technology, others don't. So I guess I have to question your market rules thing, because the market doesn't always, the market relies on people being able to pay, and not everybody can pay for some of their basic needs. Housing is a good example. So yes, it's nice to be able to think about getting electric cars, but not everybody can afford those. So the uptake of technology is socially dependent. It's also going to be used in ways that are not necessarily beneficial. And I wonder ecologically whether the ecological challenges have to come, technology has to serve the ecological challenges rather than being an entity on its own. Now, I'm throwing out a lot of issues here, but how do you respond to that sort of approach, Pete?
Yeah, no, fair comment.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, fair comment. I think what I presented is what the Rethink Economics is saying, or the Oxford study or McKinsey is saying. So I do share your concerns around technology being able to use for good or for evil. You know, the same WhatsApp social media application that I use to talk to my kids, because I'm in Ashburton and they're currently still in Hamilton, is encrypted, and it's used by people all over the world to plan terrorist activities, for example. I think we're already seeing people with technology making haves and have-nots, because so much of our society and government services and all sorts of things, like even the last census, were all accessed by computer technology and an internet connection, where there's many deprived households in New Zealand who've got nothing like that, and so they're locked out.
Okay. One other question about your exponential curves. Within a business, a product always has a life cycle. So, I mean, you think of the life cycle of CDs, for example, which now have been replaced. So there's an exponential growth in a particular technology, but then it reaches a peak, and often it is replaced or is overtaken by others.
Yes.
So if we go back to your sigma curves, have you taken into account thinking about when it peaks and then declines?
Well, I might just quickly jump back, if I'm allowed to. So you're quite right. If you look at the detail behind some of these curves, you'll find that some of them, for example, are digital cameras or MP3 players, and later on they've been taken over. This MP3 player and the digital camera have been superseded by a smartphone and a tablet. So you can see those curves go up and plateau, and then there's another one following it, and that's the new technology taking over from it. So I think that's the mere fact of our technology, consuming itself is what you're seeing there, I guess. And that's because there's an economic demand driving it, and there's also a technological force that says I'm stepping on the next step in the ladder, and each technological change is building on the one before.
Oh, thank you. And thank you so much, Pete. It's been absolutely fascinating to take this little glimpse of the future, although it's a bit terrifying as well. But it was a fantastic opening to our new series.
Thank you very much.
Please, everybody, do come back next week and for all the weeks after that, the next 10 weeks. And we hope to see you there. I'm just going to finish with a prayer from a Jim Cotter prayer book. A God of truth and mercy, whose voice we miss in the distractions of our lives, penetrate the core of our being, that we may hear and be glad, knowing ourselves accepted in your love, able once again to live in your truth and forgiveness. Amen.